History often calls him one of the greatest heroes who ever lived. A king who conquered lands from Greece to India. A man whose name still echoes after more than 2,000 years. Students learn about his brilliant battles. Movies show him riding bravely at the front of his army. Stories describe him as fearless, intelligent, and unstoppable. But what if the truth is not the same as the legend? What if behind the shining armor and heroic stories there was a different man? A man even his own soldiers feared. Some ancient writers left behind uncomfortable memories. Memories not of glory, but of blood, anger, and sudden death. They wrote about a king who demanded absolute loyalty. A king who could reward his friends with gold one day and order their death the next. His soldiers followed him across deserts, mountains, and unknown lands. They saw victories that changed the world. But they also saw something darker growing inside their king. A hunger that never stopped. A hunger for more power, more land, more control. And slowly, many of them began to ask a quiet question in their hearts. Was their king truly a hero? Or was he becoming something far more dangerous? This is the story of a man history praises as Alexander the Great. But this story is not about the shining statue you see in books. This story is about the man behind the legend. The victories, the fear, the growing obsession with power, and the moment when even his closest allies realized that no one was safe anymore. Because once Alexander started believing he was unstoppable, the world around him began to pay the price. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Long before people called him Alexander the Great, he was simply a young prince growing up in the kingdom of Macedon. He was born in 356 BC, the son of Alexander the Great and his powerful father Philip II of Macedon. His father was already a strong ruler and a brilliant military leader. Philip had spent years building an army stronger than any in Greece. From the moment Alexander could walk, he grew up surrounded by soldiers, weapons, and stories of war. His mother, Olympias, told him something again and again when he was young. She told him he was not an ordinary boy. She told him he was chosen by the gods. Some stories say she even told him that the great god Zeus was his real father. Whether this was true or not did not matter. What mattered was that Alexander believed he was meant for something bigger than everyone else. As a child, he showed signs of the fierce personality that would later shape his destiny. One famous story tells how a wild horse named Bucephalus could not be controlled by anyone. The horse was strong, violent, and dangerous. Many men tried to ride it, but the horse threw them to the ground. Then the young Alexander stepped forward. Instead of fighting the animal, he noticed something others did not. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. Alexander gently turned the horse toward the sun so it could not see the shadow anymore. Slowly, calmly, he climbed onto its back. And the wild horse obeyed him. People watching were shocked. Even his father Philip was amazed. Philip reportedly looked at his son and said something that would later become famous. He told Alexander, "My son, find a kingdom large enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." From that moment, many believed the young prince was destined for greatness. But greatness can grow in different ways. As Alexander grew older, he was taught by one of the most famous teachers in history, the philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle taught him about philosophy, science, medicine, and politics. He filled Alexander's mind with ideas about heroes, honor, and glory. Alexander especially loved the ancient story of Achilles, the fearless warrior from the epic poem The Iliad. Achilles was brave, powerful, nearly unstoppable, and Alexander wanted to be just like him. But admiration can sometimes turn into something more dangerous. Because Achilles was not just a hero. He was also known for his anger and destruction. And those same traits slowly began to grow inside Alexander. When Alexander was just 20 years old, something happened that would change his life forever. His father, King Philip, was suddenly assassinated. In a single moment, the young prince became the king of Macedon. Many people expected the young king to struggle. After all, he was only 20. But Alexander moved quickly. Anyone who might challenge his power was eliminated. Rebellions were crushed without mercy. Cities that resisted him were destroyed. Thousands were killed or sold into slavery. To some people, this showed strength. To others, it revealed something else. A young king who believed fear was the fastest path to power. And this was only the beginning. Because Alexander was not satisfied with ruling Macedon. He had grown up hearing stories of powerful empires beyond Greece. The greatest of them all was the mighty Persian Empire. It was vast, rich, powerful, and Alexander decided something that would shock the world. He would conquer it. His generals tried to understand the young king's ambition. His soldiers prepared for war. Thousands of men would soon march behind him into lands they had never seen before. At first, they believed they were following a hero who would bring them glory. But none of them knew yet how far Alexander's ambition would go, or how many lives would be lost before he was finally satisfied. Because for Alexander, victory was never enough. Once he tasted power, he always wanted more. When Alexander the Great finally marched out of Macedon, thousands of soldiers followed him with excitement and pride. Many of them were young. Many had never traveled far from home. But they believed in their king. Alexander had promised them glory, riches, and a place in history. He told them they were about to defeat the mighty Persian Empire, an empire that had ruled enormous lands for generations. To many Greeks, Persia had always been the great enemy. Stories of old wars between Greece and Persia were still told in every village and city. So when Alexander announced his plan to attack Persia, many believed they were not just fighting for wealth. They were fighting for revenge and honor. In the year 334 BC, Alexander and his army crossed into Asia. The moment they stepped onto foreign land, something inside the young king seemed to awaken. This was not just a war anymore. This was the beginning of his dream to rule the world. The first major battle came near a river called the Granicus River. The Persian army waited on the opposite side, confident that the river would slow Alexander's attack. But Alexander did something many generals would never dare. He ordered his army to charge directly into the river. Water rushed around the soldiers' legs as arrows flew through the air. Persian cavalry attacked from the riverbank. The battle was chaotic and brutal. Alexander himself rode straight into the fighting on his famous horse Bucephalus. He believed a king must fight beside his soldiers. He wanted them to see his courage. And they did. They saw their king charging at enemy soldiers, sword raised high. The battle ended in victory for Alexander. Many Persian commanders were killed. The path into Asia suddenly opened. For Alexander's army, it felt like the beginning of an unstoppable journey. But victory always came with a price. After the battle, Alexander ordered the captured Greek mercenaries who had fought for Persia to be punished severely. Many were killed. Others were sent away as prisoners. Some soldiers began to notice something about their king. When he won a battle, he did not celebrate peace. Instead, he immediately began planning the next conquest. City after city fell before his army. Some cities opened their gates and welcomed him. Those cities were usually spared, but the cities that resisted him faced something very different. One of the most famous examples happened when Alexander reached the powerful city of Tyre. Tyre was protected by the sea and strong walls. Its leaders refused to surrender. Alexander could have moved on. Instead, he decided that the city must be destroyed. For 7 long months, his army surrounded Tyre. They built massive siege machines. They created a long road across the sea to reach the island city. It was a project that cost enormous time, energy, and lives. But Alexander refused to give up. Finally, his army broke through the defenses. What happened next shocked even some of his own soldiers. Thousands of people in Tyre were killed. Ancient accounts say around 30,000 civilians were sold into slavery. The city that once stood proudly in the sea was left broken and silent. To Alexander, it was a message to the rest of the world. Resist me, and you will be destroyed. At first, many soldiers accepted this brutality as part of war. But slowly, some began to feel uneasy, because Alexander seemed to be changing. Every victory made him more confident. Every conquest made him believe he was unstoppable. And the more power he gained, the less patience he had for anyone who questioned him. His army continued marching deeper into the Persian world. They eventually faced the powerful Persian king Darius III. Their armies met in one of the most famous battles in ancient history, near a place called Issus. The Persian army was enormous. Some ancient writers say it was many times larger than Alexander's force. But Alexander used clever strategy and fearless attacks. Once again, he led from the front. When the fighting became intense, Alexander charged directly toward the position of King Darius himself. Seeing the Macedonian king rushing toward him, Darius panicked. He turned his chariot and fled the battlefield. The moment the Persian king ran away, his army collapsed. It was another massive victory for Alexander. After the battle, Alexander captured the family of Darius, including his mother, wife, and children. Instead of killing them, he treated them with respect. This surprised many people and helped build his image as a noble and honorable conqueror. But while the royal family lived in comfort, the lands around them were still burning. Cities continued to fall. Villages were destroyed. And the road behind Alexander's army was filled with the memories of thousands who had died. To the outside world, Alexander looked like a hero writing history. But among the soldiers who marched beside him every day, a quiet feeling was beginning to grow. Their king was brilliant. Their king was brave. But their king was also becoming something more dangerous. Because Alexander was no longer fighting only for victory. He was fighting for complete domination. And when a man begins to believe that nothing can stop him, even his closest friends can become enemies. After defeating the armies of Darius III, the reputation of Alexander the Great grew larger than ever. To many people across the ancient world, he now seemed unstoppable. Cities opened their gates the moment they heard his army was coming. Leaders rushed to welcome him with gifts, gold, and promises of loyalty. They hoped that if they honored Alexander, their cities would be spared from destruction. And often, they were right. But even as Alexander's power grew, something else began to change inside him. At the beginning of the campaign, Alexander had fought like a brilliant general. He planned battles carefully. He listened to advice from experienced commanders. Some of those commanders had served his father, Philip II of Macedon, for many years. They were loyal, skilled, and wise. One of the most respected among them was the powerful General Parmenion. Parmenion was older than Alexander. He had fought in many wars and helped Philip build the powerful Macedonian army. In the early years of Alexander's campaign, Parmenion was one of his most trusted advisors. When Alexander was still a young king, Parmenion's experience helped guide many decisions. But as time passed, Alexander began to rely less and less on advice. Victory after victory filled him with confidence. Soon, he was not just calling himself King of Macedon. He began presenting himself as the King of Asia. When Alexander entered the ancient city of Babylon, The people welcomed him like a great ruler. The city was rich and beautiful. Huge walls surrounded it. Gardens and temples filled the streets. Instead of destroying Babylon, Alexander made it one of his important capitals. For many soldiers, it felt like the campaign might finally be ending. They had already defeated the Persian king. They had marched thousands of miles. Many believed they would soon return home as heroes. But Alexander had other plans. He was not satisfied with the lands he had already conquered. He wanted more. He pushed his army further east, chasing the remaining forces of the Persian Empire. Finally, after another series of battles, the great empire that had ruled Asia for centuries completely collapsed. The world had never seen anything like this before. A young king from a small kingdom had defeated one of the largest empires in history. Many believed Alexander would now return home and rule his enormous empire. But Alexander did something unexpected. Instead of returning to Macedon, he began adopting many customs of the defeated Persian rulers. He wore Persian royal clothing. He introduced Persian traditions at his court. Some of his Macedonian soldiers became uncomfortable with these changes. They had followed Alexander to defeat the Persians, not to become like them. One tradition in particular caused anger among the Macedonian generals. Alexander began encouraging a custom called proskynesis. In Persian culture, people would bow deeply or even kneel before their king. To Persians, this was normal. But to Macedonians, it felt like worship. They believed only the gods deserved that level of respect. Many soldiers whispered quietly among themselves. Was Alexander still their king? Or was he beginning to believe he was something more than human? At the same time, Alexander started surrounding himself with new advisors from Persia and other conquered lands. Some of his old Macedonian generals felt pushed aside. Men who had fought beside him since the beginning now found themselves with less influence. Among those watching these changes carefully was the loyal but cautious general Parmenion. Parmenion respected Alexander, but he also worried about the direction the young king was taking. He sometimes advised caution. Sometimes he suggested that the army should rest or return home. But Alexander did not like hearing such ideas anymore. He wanted forward movement, more battles, more land, more glory, and slowly, something dangerous began to grow inside the royal court. Fear, because Alexander's mood could change quickly. One moment he was generous and friendly. The next moment he could become angry and suspicious. Small disagreements sometimes turned into serious conflicts. And the longer the campaign continued, the more tired the soldiers became. They had marched across deserts, mountains, and endless battlefields. They missed their homes. They missed their families. But Alexander kept pushing them forward. Because in his mind, the world still had lands he had not conquered. And that meant the journey was not finished. What many soldiers did not realize yet was that Alexander's growing suspicion would soon lead to one of the most shocking decisions of his entire reign. A decision that would send fear through the entire army. A decision that would prove something terrifying. Not even the king's closest allies were safe anymore. As the empire of Alexander the Great continued to expand, the atmosphere inside his camp began to change. At the beginning of the journey, the army had felt like a brotherhood. Generals, officers, and soldiers shared the same dangers. They fought the same enemies. They celebrated victories together. But now, after years of conquest, a quiet tension filled the air. Alexander had become more powerful than any ruler of his time. His empire stretched across enormous lands that once belonged to the mighty Persian Empire. Yet the more power he gained, the more suspicious he became. The king who once trusted his generals now began to watch them carefully. He started wondering if some of them secretly doubted him, or even planned to betray him. These fears were not completely impossible. After all, many powerful rulers in history had been betrayed by those closest to them. But Alexander's reactions were becoming more extreme. One small rumor could suddenly turn into a serious investigation. And then, one day, a frightening accusation appeared inside the Macedonian camp. A young officer named Philotas was accused of knowing about a secret plot against Alexander's life. Philotas was not an ordinary soldier. He was the son of the respected General Parmenion, one of the most trusted commanders who had served both Alexander and his father Philip II of Macedon. For years, Parmenion had been one of the pillars of the Macedonian army. His experience and loyalty helped Alexander win many important battles. But now his son stood accused of something terrible. The accusation was simple but deadly. Some soldiers claimed that Philotas had heard rumors about a plan to assassinate Alexander, but had not reported it to the king. In Alexander's court, this was considered almost as serious as the crime itself. When the news reached Alexander, his reaction was swift. Philotas was arrested. The royal camp suddenly became filled with tension and fear. Everyone understood that this situation could easily grow into something much larger. Because accusing Philotas also meant questioning the loyalty of his father, Parmenion. The trial of Philotas began in front of the Macedonian officers and soldiers. Many watched in silence as the young officer defended himself. Philotas insisted he had done nothing wrong. He claimed that the rumors he heard were meaningless and not worth reporting. But Alexander was not convinced. By now, the king's mind had become deeply suspicious. He began to wonder if Philotas had been hiding something much more serious. Some historians believe that torture was used during the investigation. Under extreme pressure, Philotas eventually confessed to being part of a conspiracy. Whether this confession was true or forced is still debated by historians today. But in Alexander's court, the decision was already forming. Philotas was declared guilty. The punishment was brutal and final. He was executed by stoning, a harsh method meant to show the army that betrayal would never be tolerated. For many soldiers watching the execution, the moment felt deeply disturbing. Philotas had been a respected officer. His father was one of the greatest generals in the army. And now he was dead. But the situation was about to become even more shocking. Because far away, in another part of the empire, the General Parmenion was still alive. Parmenion was stationed in the city of Ecbatana, guarding an important military base and treasury. The problem was simple and terrifying. If Parmenion learned that his son had been executed, how would he react? Would he accept the king's decision peacefully? Or would he become angry and seek revenge? For Alexander, the answer did not matter. He could not take the risk. Even though Parmenion had served him faithfully for years, even though he had helped build the army that conquered half the world, Alexander decided that the old general was now a potential threat. And in Alexander's mind, threats had only one solution. Before Parmenion could hear about his son's execution, Alexander secretly sent a messenger carrying deadly orders. Orders that would change the entire atmosphere of the Macedonian army forever. Orders that said one thing clearly: Parmenion must die immediately, without trial, without warning, without the chance to defend himself. And when those orders reached Ecbatana, the soldiers who had once respected Parmenion faced a terrible command. They had to kill their own general, a man who had fought beside them for decades, a man who had helped create the victories they all celebrated. In that moment, something inside the Macedonian army broke, because they finally understood a painful truth. If even Parmenion could be killed like this, then no one was safe from the king's suspicion. By the time Alexander the Great led his army toward the distant lands of the Indus River, something had changed within the hearts of his soldiers. For nearly a decade, they had marched thousands of miles. They had crossed deserts where the sun burned their skin and rivers where the water was icy and unforgiving. They had fought countless battles, defeating armies larger than their own and conquering cities rich with treasures and secrets. And yet, despite all their victories, a heavy shadow fell over the camp. The soldiers were exhausted, not just in body, but in spirit. They had seen their friends die in battles that sometimes seemed endless. They had witnessed the consequences of Alexander's ambition. Cities burned, civilians slaughtered, and even their own generals executed under suspicion. The man they had once called a hero, the king who had tamed Bucephalus, crossed the Granicus River, and defeated Darius III, was no longer the same. Some soldiers whispered quietly at night. Others stopped speaking entirely, staring at the fires of their camp with hollow eyes. They remembered Parmenion, one of the wisest and bravest men they had ever followed. His death had shattered their sense of safety. If a general so loyal could die without warning, who among them was truly safe? And yet, Alexander pushed forward, refusing to stop. He wanted to reach the end of the world. He wanted to defeat every king, capture every city, and make every river and mountain part of his empire. Every victory made him hungrier, more restless, and more convinced that he alone was unstoppable. But the army had limits. When they reached the banks of the Hyphasis River, a decision was made that would mark the first true defeat of Alexander, not by an enemy, but by the people who had followed him through everything. The soldiers refused to go any further. They had fought through wars, deserts, mountains, and rivers. They had crossed oceans of unknown lands. They had witnessed horrors that most men could not even imagine. And now, they were done. Alexander tried to persuade them. He threatened them. He promised them riches and glory if they continued. He even wept in front of them, pleading for them to march on. But the soldiers stood firm. It was the first time anyone had openly defied him. For the first time, Alexander faced a truth he could not conquer with swords, strategy, or fear. Even he had limits. That moment marked a turning point. Despite his victories, his unstoppable army, and his immense power, Alexander realized that the world had boundaries, even for him. And it was in those final days of his campaign that the full story of Alexander emerges, not just as a hero, but as a man consumed by ambition and the thirst for control. His legacy would be remembered for thousands of years. Statues would rise in his honor. Cities would be named after him. Stories of his brilliance and courage would inspire generations. But behind the glory, history also preserves a darker truth. A king who could inspire loyalty and devotion also inspired fear. A man who achieved greatness was also unforgiving, ruthless, and driven by an endless hunger for power. And even those who loved him, or thought they did, knew that nothing could protect them from his suspicion. Alexander's story forces us to ask a question that echoes through time. Is greatness measured by how far a man can conquer, or by the cost of the lives left in his wake? For Alexander, the world lay at his feet. Yet the price of that conquest was more than just land or treasure. It was fear. It was betrayal. It was the death of anyone who might stand in his way. And in the end, that is the shadow behind the legend. The world remembers Alexander the Great. But history also whispers the story of a man whose ambition may have been greater than his humanity. If you enjoy dark, untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.